So there are a couple ways that you can protect your assets in the event of divorce. Having a prenuptial agreement is the best way, most likely, to protect that, but not everybody starts that way. The accounts that you can protect or the assets you can protect are the assets that you had prior to the marriage or any inheritance, anything that you acquired during the marriage. Generally, depending on the state, they're common law states. Even in some separate property states or common property states rather, there's 9 of those, even if you commingle, but, um, having your anything you acquire during a marriage usually ends up being marital property. But let's say, for example, you had property before you were married, and you wanna keep that separate and you don't have a prenup. What you can do is literally keep that separate. So if you have separate bank accounts, real estate that's just titled to you, everything kept separately in name, and you can show that you owned it before the marriage, it could be protected in the event of divorce. If you commingle that funds, let's say, for example, you have a house titled jointly, and let's say you take your individual cash from your individual account you had before your marriage and you pay off that house, that now becomes marital property because you commingled it with a marital asset. So you want to be careful if you're trying to keep things separate, just to literally keep them separate. Inheritances is another thing. So many times it's best practice if you're going to inherit property to have your parent, grandparent do that in trust, or you, if you're leaving assets to your children to protect from their divorce, to leave that in trust to them. If they didn't do that though, and let's say they just left it in your name and you're inheriting this property from a family member or from someone else, you can set up separate accounts and leave that completely separate so that is very clear that you did not commingle that. So you would not want to put that in a joint account, for example, with your spouse. So that would leave it completely separate to, in the event of divorce, to show that you inherited this and it was separate from the property that you had together. But the second you commingle it and mix it together, then usually becomes marital property. So it's important to delineate the fact of that. You could also do something like a revocable trust. An irrevocable trust is better, but you could have a separate trust that's set up just for these assets that go to a different beneficiary. So, for example, sometimes if you inherit money from a family member, you may want to keep that separate in a revocable trust. And maybe that revocable trust goes to your children because it's keeping it in the family and it wouldn't go to your spouse. So even if you were to pass away. So that's a way to keep it completely separate. So the titling is what matters here. Make sure that you talk to someone if you're going to inherit money or even before you get married and how you want things structured when you first get married. I see this mostly with second marriages is where I mostly see it. If you don't have a prenup, just trying to keep things separately, they operate separate in the household. Maybe they have a joint account where they deposit funds into to pay the bills, things like that, but they want to leave it separate and then leave things separately to their children. And that's another estate plan video we can do on that. But if you commingle funds together, either from inheritance or that you had before the marriage, it typically does become marital property in the event of divorce. So it's very important to keep that separate. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions.